Everyone, what is going on? What is going on? Welcome to That Man Show. My name is Curtis Brooks. I am your host and executive coach. I help high achieving men master the art of integrated leadership and authentic masculine presence. Guys, first, before we get started, I want to apologize. We are not showing over on LinkedIn. For some reason, I got an error right as I was trying to get started with the broadcast here. So I want to apologize for that. So if you are on Facebook or on Substack, you can check me out also on YouTube. So over on YouTube, it's admins life coaching on YouTube. Let me put this on the screen here. And also on LinkedIn, it was supposed to be, or LinkedIn is still at Brooks Curtis on LinkedIn, and Substack at Brooks Curtis over on Substack. And as I just mentioned seconds ago, at Men's Life Coaching over on LinkedIn. So I do apologize. Let me see if for some reason it's showing up. And yeah, I do apologize for that, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, it's got an error here over on LinkedIn, so I do apologize for that. So we do want to get started. That is unfortunate. That is unfortunate. But once again, check us out on either one of those streams there. Mine is LinkedIn. For whatever reason, it's not appearing on LinkedIn. Not sure why, but check us out there on Substack at Brooks Curtis or YouTube, Men's Life Coaching on YouTube. We got a great conversation and discussion for you. So again, we're talking about why leadership is mostly misunderstood and how you can fix it. Great conversation and discussion, guys. Let's get started. We have been doing leadership backwards. In my mind, I believe it's like placing the cart before the horse. And I want to dive more into that because this is what I wrote the other day when I was doing this broadcast, or at least before, as I was preparing for the broadcast. I wrote, leadership is a personal responsibility, an inside job, a projection of order or disorder. It casts its shadow, and all are subject to its reflection. Yeah, I thought that was powerful. And here's what I mean when I say that. Leadership is absolutely a personal responsibility. And regardless of how we feel about leadership, or those who have been in leadership, or our attempt at leadership, it is still an inside job. And because because leadership is an inside job, it is also a reflection. We are also a reflection of that leadership, or their lack thereof. And so, how we show up is really our reflection, or how we show up is what we project on the inside from just that mirror that we're looking at, and it is also our reflection on the outside. So it's important to understand that, because what happens, and here's why I say we're looking at leadership, we've been doing leadership backwards, because leadership, as I mentioned seconds ago, a couple of different times, but leadership is an inside job. It is personal. And when we are not leading our respective lives, we show up as the views of the society, that societal view, how society has viewed us, or society has deemed this is what leadership looks like, or at least we show up from that traditional space of leadership. So today we're gonna cast out those eras that we've been looking at, or we've been so accustomed to for so long. We're going to cast out those eras and make sense of a non-traditional way of leadership. And it's not necessarily new. This particular style of leadership is not new. We're going to get more into that. You've heard me speak on this before, so we'll definitely get more into that. But we are talking about the integrated leadership, so I'll dive more into that. But before we dive more into that, let's talk about the problem that we often face in this traditional space of what we call leadership. And again, hence why I say that we're doing it backwards. Leadership, from the traditional sense, it is a conflict that we are introduced with. It's a set of ideas that humanity, or at least within the confines of an organization, set of situations and circumstances that are introduced to us. And customarily, we find ourselves trying to solve these problems as they come, solve these problems, or the issues and circumstances that come with the traditional way of leadership. Customarily, we find ourselves trying to solve those problems from a space of the problem is outside of us. The problem is over there, and the problem is behind us. The problem is just something outside of us. And so here's the challenge with that. Because when we see that the problem is outside of us, and this is obviously how leadership often, the traditional way of leadership often approaches leadership. They see leadership or the problems arise on the outside. But I want to challenge that. Because just as well as the problems show up on the outside, well before the problems or the issues or the circumstances or various situations may show up within our teams, or it may show up within a particular situation that we may be dealing with as a leader, well before those things show up, they become part of our own persona. And when they become part of our persona, again, this is us looking at ourselves in the mirror. This is us at some point, from that reflection on how we see ourselves, the conflict that shows up in our own respective lives, well before the team is dealing with it, well before our family members are having issues with our stuff, or vice versa. Well before those things show up, it's the internal conflict that shows up on the inside of us, the unresolved issues that show up on the inside of us. And so here's what I want to propose this is why I say we're doing it backwards. We've been doing leadership backwards, because what happens is that we can find ourselves trying to wrangle in the aftermath. I think it's a good word. We can find ourselves trying to wrangle in the aftermath of that situation, where the conflict, the internal conflict, has been showing up, has been there for some time, and whether it's something we're dealing with now, or we've been dealing with at just on a perpetual situation repeatedly, it's been there. And so what happens is that we project that conflict outward. And so it's only at that time that we find ourselves trying to wrangle in the very thing that's been brewing for eons, or whatever the time period has been. Only then can we find ourselves again dealing with the aftermath after the situation has shown up outwardly. Again, we're dealing with this matter outwardly. And this is what oftentimes leadership, the traditional way of leadership, this is what many of us are accustomed to, is dealing with the leadership from a reactive perspective rather than a proactive perspective. Now, the proactive perspective would be for each of us to deal with our situations as they show up on a personal level. whether you're dealing with those situations in way of using a counselor or a therapist or psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever the case might be, that is the proactive way. But customarily, we deal with leadership from a reactive response, meaning that it's only after, again, the aftermath of what we may have been dealing with, or the conflict that may have been brewing in our minds, or different things that have been unsettled, we can only find ourselves dealing with those things, at least trying to manage those things, or proposing some kind of fix for those things only after it's been presented to us. And so this is oftentimes on how we as so-called leaders, and it's that's not a dig, because it's just what we've known. But what I'm proposing here is for us to look at leadership from an entirely different perspective. It's not new, but it comes from a perspective that we're looking at ourselves, because at some point, as we are leaders, we're going to be a reflection. So whether you are a good leader or having issues in certain areas of leadership, it's still going to be a reflection that you are projecting onto others. Okay? It's still going to be a reflection that we are projecting onto others as we are trying to become, or at least we've perhaps set a goal to become that leader, or that man that we are desiring to become, to show up at a better version of ourselves. It's important to understand this now, because I think this is a huge piece, and this is what made me so excited about having this conversation this evening, is because I said, wait a minute, we're doing leadership backwards. And so that way, as I mentioned earlier, it makes it difficult for us to be proactive, because even in the way of being proactive, it is for us as individual leaders to be responsible for being proactive in regards to how our reflection of ourselves is showing up, how we see ourselves. Because if we're disgruntled with ourselves, or dealing with some matter that is unresolved, it shows up in the way we lead. Oftentimes, we as leaders, we like to try to compartmentalize certain things and separate the whites from the colors and the things of the nature. And that didn't sound right, but separate the clothing. And as let's just say you're doing laundry, so naturally you're going to separate some things. And put the socks with the underwear, the colors, keep them separate from the whites and things of that nature. We do the same thing with leadership oftentimes. We like to pretend or believe that our personal matters are going to be separate from our professional lives. The things that we like to try to keep hidden, perhaps a secret on some level. Our past lives, things that we have not resolved. We like to try to believe that those things won't affect how we are leading professionally. I want to propose to you that that's not true. However we show up as leaders, whether you've got people who on your team members who can vouch for you and say, hey, so and so is a great leader, and then for all intents and purposes, I believe that you probably are a great leader. But either way, there's going to be a reflection. There's going to be a reflection. So as far as leaders, we have to be prepared to check ourselves on a daily basis, if not just moment by moment, to ensure that the that the suggestions, so to speak, that show up in life, that show up in our thoughts at different times, that those suggestions don't infiltrate us showing up and as good leaders. We have to be prepared to, again, to make sure that the different suggestions that come out, that show up in through life, throughout the course of the day, throughout the course of a week or months, we have to be prepared to make sure that those suggestions don't show up as infiltrators or some kind of psyops or something like that to just infiltrate our program, because that's just what happens at times. That's what happens at times. We have suggestive thoughts throughout the course of a day that will show up to be a part or to keep us fragmented at times, and so we cannot show up. It prevents us from showing up in a holistic manner. So it is important to know that our internal conflicts, they become external conflicts, situations and circumstances. And when these internal conflicts show up as external conflicts, this is just the nature of life. This is just a fact of life. And as these external conflicts show up as situations and the circumstances that we're dealing with, they absolutely pose a threat to how we lead as leaders. They pose a threat how we show up as fathers in our households. They pose a threat to how we show up as husbands. They pose a threat how we show up as fathers, and just overall how we show up in this world as men in society. That is the internal conflict. When the internal conflict has no resolution, it becomes the external conflict. It becomes the projection. It starts off as a reflection of how we see ourselves. But at some point, the internal conflict becomes the external conflict, and it becomes the situations, it becomes the circumstances, and at some point it becomes the very projections, the very thing that we're projecting onto others. And so whether you are a good leader, whether you are not so good leader who might be challenged with certain areas of leadership, it's always the man looking in the mirror. It's always the man looking in the mirror. But through a traditional lens of leadership, of how often we like to try to solve the leadership problems that show up in leadership, the leadership problems that show up is not necessarily a problem outside of us. And then I think this is historically that how we see leadership. Leadership is something that we're solving outside of us. And that is the farthest from the truth. Thank you, Lachelle, for showing up on Substack. I appreciate you. That is the farthest from the truth. The problems that show up in leadership, they're not outside of us. They're on the inside. As I mentioned earlier, leadership is a personal responsibility, an inside job, a projection of order or disorder. It casts its shadow, and all are subject to its reflection. Think about that. Think about that. Hey, Lachelle over on Substack. Thank you. And good evening to you as well. So think about that. Consider that now. How our conflict may show up in our lives, unresolved as it may be. As people, we like to try to separate it. Let's just say we like to try to cover it up. One tries to separate it, another tries to cover it up. It's essentially the same thing. And so as we begin to peel back the layers on what's covered up, we can find ourselves as leaders, men and women alike, unhealed. We can find ourselves, again, trying to grasp this thing called leadership, but we're trying to grasp it from a perspective seeing leadership as outside of us. The very team members that we may be leading as leaders, even for them individually, leadership is never outside, it's an inside. If you've got a situation with productivity on your job as a leader, you might have to look at your team members individually. But in most cases, it's not because they can't do the job. It's not because they're not smart enough. They're not intelligent. It's not because of any of those things. It's going to be because of the conflict, the internal conflict, not the thing that's outside of them, because the thing that's outside of them is only a projection of the conflict it's only a projection of the internal conflict that is showing up, the unresolved internal conflict that is showing up at some point, because we cannot resolve it, not because we can't, but because we had not resolved it. It becomes something that we are contending with, a place of friction, disorder. And that disorder becomes a reflection of us being the man or the woman in the mirror. And when that takes place, we often will project that dissatisfaction. And sometimes, or a lot of times, that dissatisfaction may not even be about you and I. Really quick story here. My wife was sharing something with me the other day, situation on her job. And I was listening. And as I was listening, I remembered I had some things I wanted to share with her, and it just kind of came up at that particular moment. It just came up. And here I was listening, but not listening, but just really, if I'm honest, trying to wait for an opportunity to share my thought. And so what I ended up doing, I ended up sharing my thought, but it actually ended up taking away from what she was going through, or what she needed to share. And so naturally that put her on pause. And here's the kicker. Here's the kicker. And this is the point I'm trying to make. Naturally that put her on a pause. It's like, babe, where did that come from? And me on a personal level, afterwards, she really wasn't responding. And I didn't understand right away. But she wasn't responding, because it was just like, wait a minute. I was telling you about my stuff. You've interjected your thoughts. And I found myself wanting to get upset about it because she wasn't responding to my stuff. But I didn't get upset. And I was actually proud of myself, because I had an opportunity to say, wait a minute. It wasn't about me. And so because she didn't respond on how I wanted her to respond, or at least wasn't responding to me afterwards, naturally I wanted to, like, wait a minute, what happened? Why are you upset? And going. But I didn't. And so for me, it was an opportunity of growth. It was instant pause that I needed to take. It was reflection. And it was oftentimes for us as leaders, is that even as we're leading our teams, when we are not recognizing the issue at hand that our team may have presented to us, we can often find ourselves trying to, again, put ourselves, just as I shared with you moments ago, we can find ourselves putting ourselves or interjecting our own issues into something perhaps that's even unrelated. And I think this is oftentimes what we do as people. We've got our own set of issues, unresolved as they may be. And quietly, those issues become part of something that we need to, that the leader needs to solve. Those issues quietly become something that we've interjected into this mix. Rather than keeping the apples and the oranges separate, we can often interject our thoughts into a situation, and they become part of something that we have to fix. And in truth, it's not something, as leaders, we have to be prepared to separate those things. We have to be prepared to separate those things. And again, knowing that as people, as leaders, as team members, as husbands, as wives, again, oftentimes what we're dealing with as leaders is the thing that has been projected upon us. So it's not oftentimes a lack of, it's oftentimes not a lack of productivity. It's not a lack of incompetence or inexperience. It's what's been projected upon us. It's what's been it's what's been projected upon us that we oftentimes find ourselves having issues with in terms of leadership here. I want to read you some really quick stats here, because oftentimes I don't read a whole lot of stats, but I thought this was pretty interesting here. And we're still talking about why leadership is mostly misunderstood. And again, this is really important here. Let me see here. Oh, yeah. I know I just seen it here. Give me 1 second here. Oh, here we go. So again, in line with our conversation, we're talking about why leadership is mostly misunderstood. So I'm going to share some stats with you from a space of what they call the retention crisis. It says it is a well-documented reality that people leave managers, not companies. Up to 79% of employees may quit their jobs due to a lack of management appreciation. Furthermore, ineffective leadership is responsible for up to 32% of voluntary turnover in organizations. Now that's powerful. That's some serious numbers now. That's powerful. And here's why that's important, because when the leader is dealing with the conflict, because remember what I shared with you earlier, the conflict in leadership is often the conflict of the individual. And so and this is important also, because I don't want to make it sound like I'm just talking about leading an organization, because you can be a leader in your household as a parent. So whether it be us as parents who are projecting our stuff onto our children, onto our spouse, just within the dynamics of our family, it's the same thing. Whether it's us as leaders within an organization, reflecting the internal conflict, the unresolved conflict onto our team members, other staff members. It's the same thing. And so when our conflict shows up as leaders, we have team members who don't feel appreciated because we can be so caught up in our stuff. And obviously the conflict can come from a lot of different areas. The conflict in most cases, I believe, come from our family dynamics. Sometimes in our own families, the leaders have not felt appreciated with our own families. And so naturally, when it comes to knowing and appreciating other team members within our organization, as leaders, we don't know how to appreciate others because we didn't receive it. And sometimes that can be the difference between a good employee and a horrible employee, not because they lack the skill set, not because they lack the experience, but because we as leaders oftentimes are dealing with the internal conflict, the unresolved conflict. And when the conflict is unresolved, it's a reflection of how we see ourselves. And not only is it a reflection of how we see ourselves, it's also a projection of what we are giving off unto others. And just in what I read to you moments ago is that people aren't leaving because the job is so bad. It's because the managers, oftentimes, the leaders. Okay. And so this absolutely applies within our own households as well. All right. So it is important for us to wrap our minds around that. And I do want to apologize again for those who have been trying to join me on LinkedIn. Obviously, you're not going to hear this if you're on LinkedIn, but we're having some issues with the broadcasting, being able to broadcast to LinkedIn. I started the broadcast and I was not able to broadcast to LinkedIn. And I had actually two options, either to continue or to cancel the broadcast. And I didn't want to cancel the broadcast because if I cancel the broadcast, I would have to set all of this up again. And again, I'm streaming to multiple platforms. And so that's kind of a challenge, especially if you have not done it, if you have not prepared for it, done it in advance. It can be a challenge having to set all this up on the fly here. So again, I want to apologize for those who were not able to catch the broadcast over on LinkedIn. We're also over on YouTube at Men's Life Coaching. And you can also check me out here on Substack at Brooks Curtis here on Substack, and once more at Men's Life Coaching over on YouTube. And again, unfortunately, LinkedIn did not work, and I do apologize there because I actually do have a large following over on LinkedIn, so I do apologize for that, guys. So that is the situation, and oftentimes, again, it is the internal conflict that becomes the external conflict. That creates the situations, the circumstances that we often find ourselves dealing with. And because of that internal conflict, that unresolved internal conflict, it puts us or places us in situations where I've kind of started off, as I mentioned earlier, is that it puts the cart before the horse. It has us as people, again, looking at leadership from a traditional perspective. It has us placing leadership from looking at leadership from a perspective that it's something that we have to solve out there. And in actuality, it's something that we have to solve in here and in here. And when this is not solved in here, again, that tussling, that conflict, that tug of war that goes on within our personas for all of us at times, when we have not settled the score with certain things, we will project those things onto other people, our kids, and sometimes it's not about our kids. It's about something we're dealing with, our spouse. Sometimes it's not about our spouse. It's about us, things that we have been dealing with. Sometimes it's not about the boss, or vice versa. That it's something the boss is dealing with, and he will or she will project those things onto us, and as a result, we can find ourselves not feeling appreciated, or some other issue that might come up, or perhaps maybe even think that the leadership doesn't like you, and in fact that you might be dealing with individuals, again, just people. You may be dealing with people who have not resolved their issues, and because they have not resolved their issues show up in how they lead teams, how they show up as husbands, how they show up as fathers, and just overall how they show up in society. So think about that. Lachelle, thank you for your comment. Lachelle's over on Substack says, I love how this concept is highlighted in the book, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. Absolutely. I have not read that book, but it sounds very interesting, Lachelle. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, again, as I mentioned a few times now, that traditional space of leadership is, I believe that it's backwards. It's backwards. And because it's backwards, we can find ourselves as leaders trying to control things and people. Because what happens is that we're trying to control the thing that has actually already showed up in here. The conflict has already been here. On an individual basis, the things that we might be dealing with, it's already showed up in here, in our heart, in our mind. There's that struggle, there's that tug of war. It's already showed up. And at some point, again, we're dealing with the aftermath. And during the aftermath, it's what we, from a traditional space of leadership, it's what we begin to try to manage and tackle. But at some point, you don't know how long that person's been dealing with it. You don't know how long that leader has been dealing with that thing, XYZ, whatever it's called, or whatever they may be dealing with, that issue or situation, but it's already there. And so, as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes leadership is reactive rather than proactive. Now, leadership, as I mentioned earlier, is a individual responsibility. It's an individual responsibility. And oftentimes this is something that we, as individuals, we don't take that responsibility, because, and I'll just use a quick reference of a scripture, even in the Bible, after Adam and Eve had sinned, Adam had blamed God for the woman he had given him. Eve had blamed the serpent. And I'm sharing this not to place blame on anyone in particular, but to just show you how the level of accountability did not exist. What if Adam had taken responsibility for that? Could he have changed that? What if Eve had said, you know what, it was my fault? Could she have changed that? But because neither one of them had taken responsibility, the responsibility was left with the serpent. So they, and all of humanity, were under the guidance of what they had fallen to. This is powerful, guys. This is powerful. Now they're under the guise of the guidance of what they have fallen to. And because they had not taken responsibility, it was the same as that thing was outside of them, seen in their own minds that I had no control. It was the woman. It was the man. It was the serpent. projecting the issue outside of themselves rather than looking at themselves or seeing it as a character issue. So it is absolutely important to understand leadership from this perspective, because again, we can find ourselves trying to chase that thing that feels like it's always evading us, feeling like it's elusive. We can't quite wrap our hands around it. But when we as individuals begin to say, hey, it stops here. It stops here. The issue that I'm having is not with them or with you. The issue I'm having is with myself. Lachelle, thank you for your comments over here on Love's Substack. She says, we truly give our power when we live. We truly give away our power when we live as victim instead of taking accountability for our part in various situations. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. Absolutely. And that's precisely exactly what I'm saying, Lachelle, over here, just through this broadcast, is that, as Lachelle stated so nicely, when we give away our accountability, we in fact lose our power. That is your leadership. Being able to manage that thing, being able to put it in the right perspective, being able to make the correction. And you can't correct something if you have not been able to bring it in. If we find ourselves projecting those experiences or situations, those unresolved conflicts or issues that we're dealing with, we're always putting them out there in front of us. And leaving essentially the leadership, be it the leadership in your organization or perhaps the leadership within a government. We can find ourselves waiting for someone to fix a problem that, in fact, you and I can fix ourselves. And this leads me to a place probably that I really didn't think I was going to go to, but oftentimes in this place of leadership, it's done purposely. I talk a lot about different things in regards to leadership, different conversations, but a lot of what we're dealing with within the space of leadership is absolutely done purposely, and that is to keep us distracted. That is to keep us distracted, unfortunately, in the way of media. And I'm not saying all media is bad, and I'm not saying all media is fake by any stretch of imagination. I'm just saying is that there's going to be information out there, and we have to be prepared to challenge that information oftentimes, again, and knowing ourselves. And here's another piece of this. When we have the internal conflict that's not resolved, life has a tendency to just add unto that. It has a tendency to add more unto that and add more unto that, until at some point we find ourselves sitting under something that we don't quite understand how we got to this particular place or how we arrived here, because we have failed to deal with our own internal conflict as it shows up. And not only to mention the conflict that the world introduces as well. And this is oftentimes I think one of the bigger challenges, because conflict in itself doesn't show up. Conflict in itself doesn't show up for the fact that it has nothing to do. Conflict shows up because you have millions of people with millions of people with the unresolved internal conflict that they're dealing with. And as I mentioned again earlier, and I'll say it one more time, and you'll probably hear it another time, but the internal conflict, the unresolved internal conflict becomes the external conflict. And the external conflict becomes a projection, us projecting those things onto our team members projecting their stuff onto us. So it's never been about productivity is so low. Oh, it's the machines. It's this, it's that. I don't believe that. It's the people. It's the people who are dealing with their stuff. Life is smooth sailing when we have things in order. When we can find ourselves not looking at our neighbor or judging other people. Life is smooth sailing. Because again, we're not only dealing with our internal conflict, but we're also dealing with a conflict that the world introduces as well. Because at the end of the day, this is a fight for our soul. And whether you believe it or not, that's not up for debate. I'm not here to discuss that with you. I'm here to say that it is a fight for your soul. It is a fight for who you are as a human being. And that you become under the guidance. You and I will fall under the guidance of this world who wants to maintain us as its subjects. So leadership absolutely is about a personal responsibility. It's your responsibility. It's my responsibility. It's the responsibility of us to show our children how to lead. And when I say lead, it's not always about leading an organization, leading our families, leading our households. As a husband, being able to lead my wife in the right direction at times, her giving me solid wisdom as well, making sure I'm being led in the right direction as well. So it is absolutely an exchange. Leadership does not dominate people. That's what the traditional mindset of leadership does. It dominates people. And that's why I stated earlier, it's like putting the cart before the horse. It's backwards. But this is the leadership that we have known. Lachelle over in Substack says, I love how in the book Outwitting the Devil is referred to as a hypnotic rhythm. Absolutely. Yeah, that's another, it sounds like another great book there, Lachelle. I have not read that book, but it sounds like another great book. But yeah, so it is very interesting that you said that hypnotic, and that's exactly what it ends up being. It ends up being like we are hypnotized, and that it takes an awakening, so to speak, for us to come out of that spell. Come out of that hypnosis and begin to take charge of our own individual lives. So the other piece of this here is fear-based leadership, solving the problem and issues man has created. I've kind of been talking about that as well. Becomes the lens through which we see ourselves, others, reflection, and projection. So again, this fear-based, I'm going to put this out here. For me, I think leadership as a whole, it started off, it has its roots in fear. Leadership has its roots in fear. Leadership has its roots in fear. And so consequently, what happens is that we can find ourselves leading out of fear, doing the very same thing that the others had done, the Romans had done, and the predecessors, and so on and so forth. So it's just like a big old giant circle. And at some point, where does it end? Where does it end? So when we're leading out of fear, we are leading out of a space where, again, it's the man looking in the mirror. It's the reflection. It's it's how we see ourselves or how we don't see ourselves. Any issues of jealousy that we have not dealt with, any issues of envy, any issues of strife, any issues of abandonment, any issues of just uncertainty about who we are as an individual. Excuse me. Any of those issues, we can find ourselves being a reflection of that. And at some point, projecting those things onto others, leading out of fear of being perhaps exposed. That's a big one. Fear of just people finding out who we are. Fear keeps us feeling inadequate. Fear keeps us looking at ourselves as not being enough. Fear will have us compromising our values over something else. And we have to understand now, from this place of fear. Oh, okay. She says it's a book by Napoleon Hill. Okay. So we have to understand, from this place of fear, just as well from a space of life, from a place of where there's fear and there's life. Life will also create options and opportunities for us to network with people, to see life or the opportunities before us at a different perspective. And yet at the same time, fear will also feed us as well. Fear almost has a mind of its own. And life in itself can have a mind of its own as well, where we can see opportunities, where we can see the positive rather than the negative. It doesn't mean that we are ignoring the negative, but we see it. We have considered it to a large degree, but we're moving forward. But fear, on the other hand, it does not know how to see life. It's hard to give life to something that sits in fear. So fear feeds on itself by producing suggestive thoughts, by creating a world of its own, separate from what life represents. And so can you imagine this leader who is leading out of fear, what he or she could potentially propose, not only for their team, but what does their reflection look like? Because no matter how you cut it, slice it, or dice it, how we lead is a reflection of how we're going to project unto others. It doesn't matter whether you're a great leader. It doesn't matter if you're a leader who's challenged with certain things. We are going to be a reflection of how we see ourselves. And that reflection at some point will absolutely be a projection, us projecting those fears, those are us projecting life into a team member, life into our team as a whole, life into our organization, life into our families, as opposed to the leader who is leading out of a place of fear. He's going to project fear into his team members, fear into the team as a whole, fear into the organization. Everyone's going to be uptight. People are going to quit. So there are a lot of different things. It's almost like there are two different lives, two different perspectives. But either way, each will give a reflection. Each has a shadow that it will cast onto its members, organization, its family. So that is leading out of fear. Lachelle says over here on Substack, I address fear in my coaching program, Fresh Start. I had to learn how to turn fear into fuel, to keep moving forward on the road of personal development. Absolutely. Yeah, that's powerful. Being able to turn those lemons, such as fear, into something that we can absolutely make of use. Turn those things into power. Turn those things into fuel. That's absolutely powerful. And I think sometimes we have to we have to sit with the discomfort at first. We have to sit and be okay with being uncomfortable. And oftentimes it can be difficult for people to sit still and know that life is not going to end. But sometimes we just have to sit still and be uncomfortable for a time and a season, and know that it's not the. Marcia, thank you for joining over on YouTube. If I'm just seeing this here, Marcia says over on YouTube, life is just for living. That's interesting. Yeah, life is just for living. Very interesting, Marcia. If you can expand on that one, I'd love to know more about that one. So she says life is just for living over on YouTube. So again, guys, we're talking about why leadership is mostly misunderstood and how you can fix it. We've talked about thus far, we've talked about the problem. The bigger the problem is the internal conflict that takes place. And I'm just going to do a recap here, and we'll talk about the solution in just a second here. So again, just to recap here, the conflict is the issue that we're dealing with, the internal conflict that is unresolved that we're dealing with. As I mentioned earlier, that internal conflict turns into external conflict. The internal conflict initially is a reflection of how we see ourselves. And eventually it becomes the external conflict, and that external conflict becomes the projection, the thing that we are casting, that shadow that we're casting upon our subjects. And I don't mean subjects in a negative way, but be it our team members, individually or collectively, or just overall organization. It's the things that it's the shadow, it's the projection that we're cast upon our family members, the dynamics within our own families as well. So know that this leadership being backwards, I mentioned earlier, is that oftentimes for the issues that show up respectfully in each of us, that things that might show up that we have not dealt with, they will show up as not only a reflection of how we see ourselves, but a reflection of how others see us as well. And these are oftentimes the things that we project on others, onto others. And because we are projecting those things onto others, what happens is that we can find ourselves looking at leadership, or at least trying to manage the thing that's outside of us, rather than pulling in the reins on the thought life, pulling in on the reins of how we've left certain things unattended over an extended period of time, things that we should have managed, things that we have not healed from properly. It could be traumatic. It could be one from one person to another. One is not as traumatic as the other, but just isolated situations that where we have not dealt with. And what happens naturally is that when we have not dealt with those things, they show up. They show up on how we lead, or their lack thereof, or where we can find ourselves throwing our hands up to life and just kind of feeling like, hey, giving up on certain things and just, I don't want to do this. Projecting those things. Hey, it's not my responsibility. I've put that thing out there now. It's not my responsibility. It's your responsibility. And I would absolutely say the opposite is true. Or that thing I've just shared with you, that's not true. Because as I shared earlier, the things that we are oftentimes dealing with in leadership is us dealing with the internal conflict that has not been resolved. And so you have all these different people projecting onto each other. And as they're projecting onto each other their unresolved issues, naturally, guess what happens? They're not feeling like they've been heard. And if they have not felt like they've been heard, you have productivity that slows down. Person eventually might perhaps call into work, or maybe labeling the leader as a bad leader, when in fact it may not be the leader. Sometimes it's us projecting our stuff onto other people. It's us and our triggers at times projecting our stuff onto other people. Perhaps the leader or another team member has triggered you on some situation, completely unbeknownst to them, but that might be what you're dealing with. And now we're projecting something off onto the leader, and it just essentially becomes a domino effect. And so, as I said earlier, productivity often is not low or slow because you have people who are not capable, but you have people who have unresolved issues, people who are looking at the problem outside of them, or even leadership as a whole. From a traditional perspective, leadership as a whole looks at the problem outside of itself also. And so naturally, you have the person feeling not only unheard, but you have a person inwardly who's not developed, who's underdeveloped. And what I'm not saying is it's not necessary. It's not for our jobs to do this work. It's not for the organizations to do the work that we need to do. But oftentimes, because we haven't done the work, the job can absolutely feel like it's a place for therapy or counseling, because we're bringing our stuff onto the jobs. And again, I'm not each of us spend hours upon hours on our respective jobs, and I get that. But again, there still is a personal responsibility that we have to ourselves to lead ourselves first and foremost. And when we have not dealt with that, and again, from that internal conflict that has not been resolved, we take all of those issues and exchange them for, kind of like what the term scapegoat, if you will. We place those in burdens, those issues that we're dealing with. We can find ourselves placing those burdens, issues, and again, a conglomerate of things that we have not dealt with, placing them on other people, placing them under leadership at the job, placing them on other team members. And now it's their issue, but we feel somewhat relieved now. But what if we flipped the script on that? And we decided to do the work that we needed to do to heal? rather than making our respective jobs a clinic or a hospital. So, as I stated earlier, leadership is absolutely a personal responsibility. Absolutely a personal responsibility. And when we have not, as individuals and leaders, when we have not taken our rightful places and understood leadership from a personal responsibility, as from a personal perspective, and also from a personal responsibility, we are absolutely doing ourselves a major disservice, a major injustice is what we're doing to ourselves. Because now we're putting someone else in charge of us. We're putting the problem out there, consistently using someone as a scapegoat. And now we fall under the guidance of the very thing we fall under the guidance and now are subject to the very thing that this world has created. Society has a way too of how we should lead. But because we as individuals are not taking a lead or at least understanding leadership from a personal perspective, from a personal responsibility, we're putting our issues, again, that scapegoat mentality. And we're putting those issues onto other people, projecting, as the term they use, onto other people. And at some point we can find ourselves, I feel better now. That's not power. That's not power. That's not accountability. That's avoidance. And I think the more often we can be prepared to take accountability for the things that have showed up in our lives, respectfully, in our individual lives, we can find ourselves taking our power back. But without that individual accountability and responsibility for each of us as leaders, we'll find ourselves being led from values that are not our own, being led from a space of group mentality, fearing the group rather than holding steady or taking a stance on your own values. So we've been talking about why leadership is mostly misunderstood and how you can fix it. I'm going to run through a few things here. I've been on for about an hour and 10 minutes almost. I talk about in my coaching program the 5 pillars of transformational leadership, and this is a solution. And my program, I run a program for men that is the integrated leadership program that I run. And again, we talk about the 5 pillars of transformational leadership. I'll just run through those things really quick here. This is the solution. This is the solution. This is what I call integrated leadership, where we are taking the family dynamics of our personal lives and integrating the two from our professional lives. And as I kind of stated just a wee bit, is that oftentimes as professionals, as people, we oftentimes like to separate things and or cover up the certain things that we don't want to attend, or that we don't want to manage or take care of. And because we do that oftentimes, we can find ourselves, at least in other areas of our lives, underdeveloped. And so in working with high achieving men, this is one of the bigger issues that I'm dealing with, is that they are very successful in other areas in their lives or professional lives. But when it comes to their personal lives, they have a challenge of integrating their personal lives within their professional lives. And so I call this the 5 pillars of transformational leadership. The first one is authentic self-awareness. Again, we're talking about the solution. Now, we've spoke very heavily on the problem being the internal conflict, becoming an external conflict. And then from there it becomes a situation and circumstances, the projection, the things that we're dealing with. But when in fact, the leadership is an awareness. It is this authentic self-awareness that I'm mentioning. And that essentially is us taking a hard look at ourselves, making that pause, as I mentioned earlier briefly. That pause would stop us from, will help us to prevent us from being to laying that burden onto someone else over and over consistently, trying to replace the burden and looking at something bigger to sacrifice, because that's what happens eventually when we have not burdened the other person down, or a team member or leadership, or vice versa. Leadership has not burdened us down, burdened us with their stuff. Again, as the scapegoat, we can find ourselves looking for bigger sacrifices to place our burdens on, because as leaders, oftentimes, again, as we're dealing with the pressure of leadership, it may not be the person that's standing before us. They may not be, that particular sacrifice may not be big enough, or and this is, and this is what I'm saying, is that this is a leader who is leading out of fear. This is a leader who's leading out of fear. It's all fear-based, okay? It's all fear-based, because when we are, as leaders, have not dealt with our internal conflict, again, we're placing those issues, projecting those issues onto others. It's not theirs to bear, but in fact, it's ours to bear and take care of, or to manage, or to resolve that issue. We find ourselves placing that burden onto others, the scapegoat factor. And it can end up where we've destroyed a person. We've perhaps had this person fired from their job. And yet, even on a much bigger level, as the projects get bigger, or the assignments or the tasks get bigger for us as leaders, again, when we have not dealt with that internal conflict, we look for, the burden becomes bigger, if you will. It can feel like the burden is bigger. And so because the burden is bigger, in most cases, we will need a bigger sacrifice. This is very interesting, guys. So that's why this authentic self-awareness is absolutely important, that we stop and pause and take a deep look, a serious look at the manifestations that are taking place within our own minds, if you will. Again, pausing to see those things, pausing to look at how we feel, pausing to look at the very thought as it's passing our mind, going through our mind, if you will. Making that pause is, or at least being available to that very moment, pausing, is going to be huge. Again, that's the first step in this 5 pillars, the 5 pillars of transformational leadership that I discuss with my clients. And I work with men primarily, and I'm just going to go through these quickly as possible. The second is emotional mastery and intelligence. And this is a huge piece. This is going to be us being able to have some kind of self-regulation as men, as leaders. Self-regulation is absolutely important. And all of this stuff ties into this self-awareness, because when those different thoughts show up, can absolutely make us uncomfortable. It can be challenging to sit still as the thought comes across our mind and almost appearing to accuse us of something. An accusatory thought, if you will. Not that you've done anything, but these are oftentimes these suggestions that show up through life at different times. Our mind just processes stuff. And so there absolutely has to be some emotional mastery and intelligence, emotional intelligence along with it as well. Knowing that you're going to have to sit still in some stuff and let it process, let it and go through that stuff. And the goal is authority. That is the goal, and not from a sense of ruling over someone, but being the authority in this life that many of us have often given over to others. Okay, so that's how we get there. We've got the authentic self-awareness. That's just being honest with ourselves. That's what that's about. Being honest with ourselves and say, this is where I'm at. Okay. I mentioned about the emotional mastery and emotional intelligence. Okay. We're no longer suppressing things anymore. We're dealing with those emotions. We're dealing with those feelings. We're journaling. We're writing things down. Keep record yourself, perhaps. It's not awkward. We're breaking things. We're looking at these things, and so it becomes important to manage them to the point where we can break the cycle, break its hold on us. Okay, so that is emotional mastery. And out from that emotional mastery, as I mentioned earlier, I work with men. And so out from that emotional mastery, and this, a lot of the information I'm sharing with you, it's not just about men. That's my niche, is working with men, but it can absolutely apply to women as well. So keep that in mind. Don't just, don't fall off just yet, saying, oh, he just works with men, but get the information and apply the information. Get the information and apply the information. So number 3, the embodied masculine presence. So as a result, as for us as men, as we're taking these hard looks at who we are as men, the thoughts as they're coming across coming across our minds, and looking at how we feel at certain times, we're looking at the emotional mastery, the emotional intelligence that's applied to those different things. Again, we're not suppressing any thoughts anymore. Out comes the embodied masculine man. And when I say masculine, unfortunately, that word has a bad rap. But that's okay. But it is truly unfortunate. But it is important for us as men to take our respective places and be okay with the definition of how the world sees us as masculine. Being masculine doesn't mean that you're ruling over someone, but it is a presence that is created out of understanding. It's a presence that's created out of knowing who you are. It's a presence that's created when you have when you have taken the hard look of as who you are as an individual, when you've taken a hard look at the managing those thoughts, the self-awareness that's needed, and getting to this place. Absolutely, those things, you'll come out of the ashes like a phoenix. Absolutely, when we are doing these steps that I'm sharing with you right now, as men, you're absolutely going to be able to embody that masculine presence. That is going to be the authority that you, as a man, will rise up in. Absolutely. So it comes with the territory when we are doing the work, gentlemen. Okay. Number 4, the integrated identity architecture. Okay. That is where we're using this information now as building blocks. Now we're building onto something. We've taken the results of the authentic self-awareness. Again, we're taking a moment to take a hard look at ourselves, and we are Secondly, we're looking at the emotional mastery, the emotional intelligence that's involved with that, and putting those things together intelligently from an intelligent perspective. Number three, again, that masculine man rising out of the ashes like a phoenix, right? He's coming to understand who he is, not who or what society says he needs to be. He is gaining more clarity, has more clarity. He's got a set of values that he's now following. He's challenging those values with what the world presents now. And he's making a decision to maintain what he's created for himself rather than trying to intermingle the values of the world or what society has created, or how society says the men, how we should live as men. He's now looking at those things because we're absolutely going to be challenged with how the world or society presents things to us as opposed to the values that we have created for ourselves. So there's going to be that challenge, but the man makes that decision to take a stand, to draw a line in the sand, so to speak. And then that is the embodiment of the masculine presence. And fourth, we've got the architecture. And this is what you begin to build now as men. This is what we begin to build. We begin to build that architecture that says, hey, I'm gaining clarity. I'm gaining. I'm being more authentic in this space now. I'm learning how to be comfortable with who I am. I'm learning that pause, that all important pause, is absolutely hugely important. So these are all the things you begin to build. All these things are happening simultaneously now. They're not necessarily individual pillars, but as I'm sharing with you, they're individual pillars, but they're all happening simultaneously. And lastly, the man is prepared to leave a legacy. And legacy is not something that I'm not necessarily talking about financially. He may have that already taken care of. But leaving a legacy in the way of leadership, of what I've been sharing with you. Leaving a legacy of being able to be accountable for the things that show up in our individual lives. That's the kind of legacy that I want to leave for my family. And so within this program that I created, again, Integrated Leadership, I've been talking to you about the 5 pillars of transformation leadership. That's what you as a man will be capable and able to do, is to leave a legacy for your family. And so that they're not going to be having to deal with the things that dad has not dealt with. Okay. So in conclusion, leadership is a personal responsibility, an inside job, a projection of order or disorder. It casts its shadow, and all are subject to its reflection. Leadership is not outside of you. The problems only show up as what's being projected from the reflection. So if you can imagine an entire team as projecting their stuff, trying to find a scapegoat, because the entire team, including the leader, including an organization or several organizations, let's take a community. This is often what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people projecting their stuff upon each other, looking for a scapegoat. And the challenge is now we're having to deal with the things. We're having to heal now. Because if not, we can find ourselves putting our entire families, entire organizations in the way of something catastrophic. So that being said, guys, I hope this information has been a blessing to you. For more information on what I do, or if you'd like to reach out to me for a free strategy session, absolutely reach out to me. Here is the link on the screen here. That is going to be bit.ly/integrated leadership. Again, that is a complimentary coaching session, strategy session, and it is for 30 minutes. So again, reach out to me with that link, bit.ly/integrated leadership. And I'll put that there. And so I would love to hear more information about you. We'll find out if we are a match to work with each other. And that being said, guys, I will say goodbye, and we will say ciao for now. Bye-bye.